Right. I'm off to deal with the fate of the planet. Be gentle with them.
Oh, you know me, Mark. Kid gloves, but made from real kids.
Welcome back, DC fans. Today we're diving into the mystical world of Dr. Fate, the powerful sorcerer and protector of the magical balance in the DC universe, also known as DC's version of the Sorcerer Supreme. Over the years, many characters have worn the helmet of Naboo and taken on the mantle of Dr. Fate. So in this video, explore the history with me of every Dr. Fate in the main DC Comics timeline. Our journey begins with the original Dr. Fate, Kent Nelson, created by Gardner Fox and Howard Sherman. Kent first appeared in More Fun Comics issue 55 in 1940, so you know Dr. Fate is a pretty old character. Now, Kent Nelson was an archaeologist who, along with his father, discovered the tomb of the ancient sorcerer Naboo in the Valley of Ur. When his father accidentally triggered a trap, Naboo saved Kent's life, but at the cost of his father's. Naboo then took Kent under his wing, teaching him the mystical arts and giving him the helmet of fate, the amulet of Anubis, and the cloak of destiny, transforming Kent into the powerful sorcerer known as Dr. Fate. Now, Kent Nelson served as Dr. Fate for many years, becoming a founding member of the Justice Society and defending the world against the dark arts. However, the burden of carrying the helmet was heavy, as it often led to conflicts between Kent's humanity and the overwhelming power of Naboo. The next stuff that was done with the character of Dr. Fate is pretty interesting, as we got a duel. So we moved to the late 1980s when the mantle of Dr. Fate passed to Eric and Linda Strauss. This era began in Dr. Fate #1 in 1987, so it's more like closing out of the 80s, like I said, late 80s, early 90s, whatever. Written by G.M. DeMatteis, Naboo chose Eric, a young boy, and his stepmother Linda to merge into a single entity to wield his power as Dr. Fate. The duo operated as one being, balancing each other's strengths and weaknesses. This iteration of Dr. Fate was unique and more focused on the philosophical and psychological aspects of the character. Unfortunately, Eric died in a battle, and Linda took on the role alone for a brief period before ultimately being killed too by the Lords of Chaos. In the early 1990s, following the death of Eric and Linda Strauss, the mantle of Dr. Fate returned to Kent Nelson's wife, Inza Nelson. This version of Dr. Fate debuted in Dr. Fate issue 25 back in 1999. After Kent's apparent death, Inza discovered that she could wield the powers of Dr. Fate through the helmet and the other mystical artifacts that her husband was in possession of. However, Inza's tenure as Dr. Fate was very different from her husband's. Inza's approach to being the Dr. Fate was more aggressive and less forgiving, leading to darker and more complex storylines. Her connection to the helmet allowed her to tap into raw magic, which sometimes puts her at odds with the other mystical forces she was meant to protect. Eventually, it was revealed that Kent had not died, and the couple briefly shared the mantle of Dr. Fate together, similar to Eric and Linda, before Kent ultimately returned as the sole Dr. Fate. I think the biggest shift came then in the mid-90s, with the introduction of Jared Stevens and the Fate series starting in 1994. Unlike his predecessors, Jared Stevens was not a traditional sorcerer. Instead, he was like an adventurer and treasure hunter who stumbled upon the artifacts of Dr. Fate. After a battle with demons, Jared was scarred, and the helmet of Dr. Fate shattered into a dagger, and ankh-shaped tattoos on his body began to appear. Adopting the name Fate, because like he wasn't a doctor, Jared became a more street-level hero, dealing with mystical threats in a gritty 90s anti-hero style. This iteration was a departure from the classic Dr. Fate and was kind of an attempt to modernize the character for the era. However, Jared's time as Fate was short-lived, and he was eventually killed off, leading to the restoration of the traditional Dr. Fate, because the character didn't really connect with the audience. Personally, I think that iteration had potential, and from what I could dig up online, Jared was not even a typical 90s hero, more also a deconstruction of it. Now we're in the early 2000s, which brought Hector Hall into the role of Dr. Fate, starting with JSA number 1 in 1999. Hector Hall, the son of Hawkman and Hawkgirl, had a complicated history, having been reincarnated multiple times, just like his parents. Honestly, the Hawkman Hawkgirl mythos is just a headache that I will explain eventually in another video. So, but to focus on Hector, when the helmet of Fate resurfaced, it chose Hector to be the new Dr. Fate, combining his legacy status as and the mystical responsibilities into one role. Previously, Hector had been the Silver Scarab as part of the Infinity Inc., which was a spin-off of the JSA, the Justice Society. Basically, all the kids of the Justice Society formed Infinity Inc. Hector's tenure as Dr. Fate was a return to the more traditional depiction of the character, balancing his heroic legacy with the magical challenges that came with it. He was a key member of the JSA during the time and played a significant role in many of their battles. However, like many who wore their helmet before him, Hector's time as Dr. Fate was marked by tragedy, and he eventually sacrificed himself to save others. Now, another important thing here is that Hector's son Daniel would overtake the role of Dream for Morpheus of the Endless, which is also something that ties into the into the original Kent Nelson version, but we get to do it in another. By now we ended mid 2000s or late 2000s, to be exact 2007, and a new character by the name of Kent V. Nelson took on the mantle of Dr. Fate in Countdown to Mystery number 1. Kent V. Nelson was grandnephew of the original Dr. Fate, a former psychiatrist who had fallen on hard times. Kent V was chosen by the Helmet of Fate after it had been lost again for some time. Kent V's journey as Dr. Fate was one of redemption and learning, and I struggled with this weight of the mental, but gradually grew into the role facing off against dark forces and trying to just balance his personal life and the mystical responsibilities. Now I gotta say, he did this all in a pretty short time, because he was introduced and then like only for 3 years he was the Dr. Fate, and then DC decided to reboot its entire universe again with the New 52, and this brings us to the modern iteration of Dr. Fate, which is Khalid Nassour, who debuted in Dr. Fate issue number 1 in 2005. Technically, that character was first introduced in the New 52 as part of their Earth 2 universe and the aptly titled Earth 2, which came out in 2013. And the character was popular enough to like cross over into the mainstream DC universe, and they made their own version of Dr. Fate from Earth 2 and called him Khalid Azure. Khalid is an actual medical student and the grandson of Kent Nelson, making him part of the family legacy. However, his background is rooted in Egyptian heritage, which adds a new dimension to the character, because before then everyone was like a white guy. And Dr. Fate has heavy ties to like Egyptian mythology and iconography, and this was just something that brings the character closer to home, I would say. When Khalid discovered the Helmet of Fate, he was thrust into a world of magic he barely understood, and so far Khalid's journey has been about learning and accepting his dual heritage, both as a modern American and as a descendant of Egyptian pharaohs. His story explores the challenges of balancing a normal life with, again, the power and responsibility that comes with being Dr. Fate. Khalid has become a prominent character in recent DC comics, who represents a new generation of heroes. And here's another side thing. Before Khalid, Nabu, or the Helmet, was rather irresponsive and like it was its own thing with its own identity, but yeah, all those characters could just take it off, and it wasn't anything close to possession. And it was something Young Justice, the television show, brought into the mix with their version of Dr. Fate, which is Zatanna. And since then, this change-up has been brought into the comics, that he can't take off the helmet willingly, or that Nabu sometimes just takes control of the host if he's getting tired of the host's antics. But yeah, final thoughts here. The conclusion is, here you have a complete history of Dr. Fate in short detail in the main DC Comics timeline, and each has kind of brought something unique, or they tried to do something different, and it's very different from like Marvel's equivalent. There's also a Supreme Doctor Strange. The comparisons are there enough that when DC worked with Marvel in the 90s, the Doctor Strange and Dr. Fate were mixed into one character name called Doctor Strange Fate. But yeah, there you have it. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like, subscribe, and all that stuff, and stay tuned for more deep dives into your favorite comic book characters. Until next time, I hope you enjoyed.
Don't forget to subscribe.
Well, the books are full of words that you read, and the show gets me paid.